Late last night, a white supremacist perpetrated the most devastating mass shooting in New Zealand in literally decades, killing 49 worshippers at the Noor Mosque and the Linwood Mosque. Obviously, far more were injured as well. And one statistic that stood out to me was that this represented 1 out of every 500 Muslims in New Zealand was either killed or injured in that shooting, which is devastating, of course. During the time since then, we have found out more about this shooter. There are elements of this person's background that we will go into. I am going to do everything I can not to give this person what they want and publicize information about their life. I don't want to give too much information about their philosophy or their manifesto, anything like that. I want to focus on the event, at least right now. And in pursuit of that, here is some video from late last night. This is the Prime Minister of New Zealand talking about the shooting.
What I can say is that it is clear that this is one of New Zealand's darkest days. Clearly, what has happened here is an extraordinary and unprecedented act of violence. Many of those who will have been directly affected by this shooting may be migrants to New Zealand. They may even be refugees here. They have chosen to make New Zealand their home, and it is their home. They are us. There is no place in New Zealand for such acts of extreme and unprecedented violence, it is clear this act was.
And indeed, as was alluded to there, the worshippers came from a number of different countries, including Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan, a number of others as well.
Yeah, well, I love that statement by the Prime Minister. She said they were us and the shooter was not. And so it's a good way of identifying who you are in a dark moment like this as a country and as a culture. And so it's a wonderful statement. Our own president with not quite as wonderful statements, so we'll get to that later in the program. So I have mixed feelings about what John said about the identity of the shooter and talking about it. So we usually give the name on the first day. I don't know if we're even gonna do that in this case, and then try not to ever give the name again. But I think the motivations of the shooter is of course relevant, which we all agree. And he appears to be a white supremacist, Donald Trump supporter, and hated Muslims and immigrants. Unsurprising, given that he killed 49 of them. And so here we are again, another right-wing shooting. Anti-Defamation League in 2018 said every single act of extremist murder in this country, in the United States, was done by a right-wing extremist. And this is another right-wing extremist, another massacre. Of course, internationally, they're mainly right-wing extremists as well, with Breivik in Norway. And now, is there other forms of terrorism? Of course there are. Are there other extremists from other places and religions? Of course. And so, but unfortunately, in the Western world, the extremism has clearly come from one end of the political spectrum. So I'm not interested in the right wing saying two things today. One is, oh, don't polarize. You polarize every single day, and this is what led to the shooting in the first place, was you guys polarizing. So for example, when Trump said a complete and total shutdown of Muslims in the country, that might have been a little polarizing. Another thing I'm not interested in hearing about today is Berkeley. So no, it's not even.
Wow. As you said, I'm gonna jump ahead just briefly because you sort of brought this up, but while I understand we have slightly different views on this, I want to read as few of his actual words as possible. But one thing certainly stands out, and I think it's important to acknowledge, and that would be where he called President Trump, quote, a symbol of renewed white identity and common purpose, but also mocked him as a policymaker and leader. And so look, Donald Trump tweeted earlier this morning, and he expressed sympathy to the victims. He identified the shooting as happening at a mosque. He didn't mention Islam specifically, and he spoke in an oddly passive tone, talking about people dying and not anything. I guess he didn't know anything at the time about who the shooter was or what they believed. But since then, he has been asked direct questions. With a tweet, we have no idea who actually wrote that, whether it's him or not. There were no exclamatory single word sentences, so it didn't really seem like him. But he was asked about this, and per the Pool, this is according to Daniel Dale on Twitter, Trump called the terror attack a quote, horrible, horrible thing. Instead, he called the Prime Minister to convey US sorrow, then turned to quote, crimes of all kinds coming through our southern border, adding, people hate the word invasion, but that's what it is. And we will return to that particular narrative that he's spinning there. But perhaps worse from my point of view. He was asked by a reporter if white nationalism is a growing threat, and he replied, quote, "Not really," suggesting it's just a small group of people. There have been multiple successful terror attacks. There have also been terror attacks that were thankfully averted, being conducted by people with this ideology, internationally and in the United States. Multiple, just this year, just a small problem. And I'm sure we can totally imagine if a Muslim blew up a building in the US and killed 50 people, and he was asked about whether he thinks that Islam is a serious issue, he'd probably say, it's just a small group of people.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I noticed a lot of the same people who, when Barack Obama was president and there was some sort of terrorist attack, would demand that he call it a terrorist attack, demand that he say radical Islamic terror, their preferred formulation of the sentence. But in this instance, they were trying to say, let's not talk about what this person wrote, what his name is, what his ideology is. Look, I think you guys, the viewers, are watching us struggle with how to talk about these incidents in real time. I remember after the Boston bombing when one of the Tsarnaev brothers was put on the cover of Rolling Stone, and it looked like, he looked like a rock star. And I remember feeling deeply concerned about the image that sent, about what it would mean to you as a disaffected kid who's depressed and alone and in your house every night, and seeing the treatment that's afforded to people that do horrific, hateful things. But I do think we need to talk about the cancer that is Islamophobia in this radical language. In the president's words, talking about an invasion on the southern border, that is radicalizing people. That's scaring the heck out of you if you're worried about your family. So he's part of the problem here.
Yeah, well, the guy in his manifesto, 70-page manifesto that he released, talked about the invaders. Same exact language. And he's, and says that he's partly inspired by Donald Trump, used the same language as Donald Trump. So I'm not shy about it. Do I hold Donald Trump partly responsible? Yes, absolutely. He said that we should do a total and complete shutdown of Muslims in this country. Is this an open question as to whether Donald Trump's a bigot? Of course he's a bigot. Does he drive Islamophobia? Of course. Does it lead to violence? Of course. Is he solely responsible? Come on, of course not. Of course the shooter is responsible for his actions. And look, I'm not in the of the belief that anyone who happens to be in the right wing is responsible for all right wing attacks. Of course not, right? And so there's, I don't know what the different talk show hosts' opinions on Islamophobia are, et cetera, and there's a giant range. Is Charlie Sykes somehow responsible? No, right? But if you have a very powerful leader of a country who constantly picks out one group, or in his case, several groups, some Muslims, Latinos, et cetera, and says they are the criminals. He said it again today. They are the invaders. They are the danger. Somebody should do about it. Just yesterday, he talked about, hey, I have very tough guys on my side, and if things get very bad, they could do, they could act. Clear reference to violence. So he's talked about it when if people attack protesters at his rallies, that he'll pay for their legal bills. So he revels in violence. Congressman Gianforte body slammed someone, assaulted a reporter. Donald Trump went to Montana to celebrate it. So is Donald Trump in favor of violence? Yes, repeatedly.
Yeah, and look, I tweeted something to this effect earlier where it's one thing to take something that a person has said, see it echoed in the language of a mass murderer, and then connect those two things, and they will say that that's unfair. Okay, I sort of get that. I think that if you do it repeatedly and seemingly knowingly, there is something there, but I get that they don't think that that's fair. But it's a different thing when you then proceed to continue to push that same narrative. So we know that the Tree of Life shooter believed that he, in his words, the Jews were funding caravans of immigrants to come into the country.
Right.
So he believed these conspiracy theories about the caravans that Trump had been pushing. After that shooting, Trump continued to push conspiracy theories about caravans, and Fox News would talk about George Soros funding them. So after they knew that this was triggering people, almost literally, they continued to do the same thing. When the pipe bomber sent pipe bombs through the mail to a list of Donald Trump's political opponents that he'd been demonizing for years, he responded by continuing to demonize those same people. Coast Guard shooter in a very similar way wanted to kill particular members of the Democratic Party and figures in the media. Trump continues to attack those people constantly. This guy used the language of an invasion. Donald Trump today, afterward, talked about an invasion at the southern border. So he can't plead ignorance, he can't plead coincidence. He is purposefully continuing the insightful language that we know they are already listening to and acting on.
So, and there's another big difference, which is what are people getting incited towards, right? So they'll say, well, and look, I blame the mainstream media a lot, not for the shootings, but for the coverage that is disproportionate here. They have a fetish of calling everything even when the facts are not even. So your neutrality is actually at odds with what should be your real standard, which is objectivity. So left-wing and right-wing violence in this country is not remotely even. And as we just told you, every murder committed by an extremist last year was by the right wing. And then that goes to, okay, but what are they saying? So one guy did a shooting who apparently was a Bernie Sanders fan, okay? So that's the one time they could always refer back to. Every time there's a new massacre by a right winger, they're like, hey, did you know there once was a progressive who did one shooting, right? But did Bernie Sanders go in that direction? Do progressives go in that direction? The fact that that guy wanted Medicare for all, how is that connected to a shooting? Not at all. How is the fact that Kamala Harris wants Medicare for all in any way connected to any shooting? There's no logical nexus there. On the other hand, when the right wing says, this is the group you should hate. This is the group that is the problem, that is the danger in our midst. And that constantly leaves that last sentence out, which is, isn't someone gonna do anything about it? They're the invaders, they're the virus. And they're the ones that commit the crimes. Now, also not backed up by facts, but they say all that and they go, isn't someone gonna do something about it, is the last part that's left out. And that's called stochastic terrorism, where you encourage people to act with violence, but you don't say specifically who. You don't say, hey, Bob, I want you to send a pipe bomb to George, right? You just say, isn't somebody gonna do something? They're the danger, they're the virus, they're the invaders. And then a random person pops up to go hit your political opponents.
Yeah, I mean, look, and what's scary about these far-right ideologies is they're spreading. And they're spreading in Europe, but they're also spreading because Steve Bannon is over there setting up shop in Brussels, radicalizing political parties. He's doing it in Italy, he's doing it in all sorts of places, like Hungary. So we should be worried about this. Another element that we are barely grappling with is the role of technology in helping people find radical content. Like you YouTube like how to tie a bow tie and you're like 3 hops away from some InfoWars craziness, right? And that gets you down these like QAnon rabbit holes. And like it's fun to kind of make fun of the QAnon people, but at the end of the day, it's a death cult where they think that all the liberals and Hollywood celebrities are running a pedophile ring and will be locked up and then executed, right? So like people are believing some very, very extreme, frightening, crazy things. And I don't think we can blame it on mental illness alone. I think they're being radicalized by this kind of information.
Yeah. No, and those guys live amongst us. I've said this on a number of occasions. One of my neighbors has a QAnon bumper sticker.
Really?
And so what is he willing to do? I don't know, because they're constantly instigated. So look, I think the issue of social media is a very difficult one because it has a wonderful upside, which is that it got rid of the gatekeepers. So there's not just one acceptable thought anymore. But in that freedom, you also have the monsters that have been unleashed. So we've got to find a way to corral the monsters without taking the freedom away, and it is an extraordinarily difficult job. Yeah. And so Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, this guy put out a 17-minute video live as he was doing it. They all took it down immediately, but thousands of copycat sites went up, and they're all trying to beat the algorithm by cropping some parts of the video, changing the audio so the algorithm can't catch it. And YouTube and Facebook, et cetera, are all trying to adjust as we go. And they're in a tight situation. I do not want them to go back to what I consider the bad old days where, hey, if Les Moonves says it's okay, then okay. Otherwise, we're not interested. Right. But this is a significant downside. Yeah. The TYT Plus app is now available on iOS and Android. Download to get more TYT content at tyt.com/app.